I'm Richard Lee. I'm over 25 years a solicitor, and what I'd like to do is talk to you about what directors need to know. If you're a director of a company, this is what you need to know. Now, unfortunately, this is a fairly dry topic. I can't promise to make it interesting, but I can promise to keep it short. So what I'm going to do is give you an express tour of what directors need to know. I'm going to start with the Companies Act 2014. On the 1st of June 2015, a very important piece of law came into force and into operation. It basically modernized all the company law that preceded it, and it changed the role and duties on directors. So what I want to do is tell you briefly about the law as it stands now for directors. Section 228 of the Companies Act sets out primarily what the fiduciary duties of a director are. These fiduciary duties are important because if you breach these duties, the company can sue you. There's a duty to act in good faith, a duty to act honestly and responsibly, a duty to act in accordance with the company's constitution. There's a duty not to use the company's property, information, or opportunities for a director personally. There's a duty not to agree to restrict a director's powers unless permitted or approved by the company and its owners. There's a duty to avoid conflict between a director's duties to the company and the director's personal interests, unless again permitted or approved. There's importantly a duty to exercise care, skill, and diligence. There's a duty to have regard to the interests of the company's employees in general and regard to the interests of the members and shareholders of the company. Now, in addition to these fiduciary duties, there are also statutory duties, and breach of these statutory duties can lead to imprisonment, fines, and personal liability. There's a duty to ensure that the company complies with its statutory duties. There's a duty to keep adequate accounting records, and this one is an important one, and I see this come up in court again and again where there are applications to restrict or disqualify directors. Just to put this in context, at the end of 2014, there were 3,798 directors on the register of disqualified directors and 850 directors on the register of restricted directors. There's a duty on directors to prepare financial statements, annual accounts, and so forth. There's a duty to have those statutory financial statements audited unless the company is exempt. There's a duty to maintain statutory registers and other documents. There's a duty on directors to file and make sure that statutory returns, including annual returns, change of director, change of secretary, change of registered office, resolutions, compliance statements, and so forth, are filed. There's a duty on directors to disclose their names, addresses, date of birth, nationality, occupation, and other directorships that they hold, which then go on to the available registers and are accessible by members of the public. Importantly, it is now possible for a director, in certain circumstances, not to have to disclose their home address. There's a duty to convene general meetings. There's a duty to comply with loan and non-cash transaction obligations, which we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. There's a duty in respect of insolvent companies and liquidations, and there's a duty to appoint a company secretary who has the necessary skills or resources. Now, this last one, from a practical point of view, I want to say a little bit more about. In the past, company secretaries didn't get enough attention. I think it's important now that every company has a company secretary who's able to do their job. A company secretary is an officer of a company and can be sued, and that's important. For a lot of small companies, it was more a box-ticking exercise, but with the new legislation, it's important that company secretaries realize that they have an important role to play. In plain terms, company secretaries now have a duty to exercise due care, skill and diligence in carrying out their duties and functions. Importantly as well, company secretaries should be, very importantly, included in the insurance that can be taken out by a company to cover its directors. What I want to do now is talk about loans to directors. In general, a company is prohibited from making loans to its directors or providing security or a guarantee for a director's loan. Loans to directors in breach of statutory limits are one of the most commonly reported offences to the ODCE. There are a number of exceptions, two of which I'll mention. Loans are permissible where the total director's loans do not exceed 10% of the company's relevant assets, or where the loan complies with the summary approval procedure set out in section 202. Importantly, all loans by the company to a director need to be in writing. If they're not in writing, there's a presumption that the loan bears interest and is repayable on demand. Importantly, all loans by a director to a company should also be in writing, and if not, the loan is presumed to be interest-free and is unsecured. These particular provisions are going to be a lot more relevant, I think, in the event that a company goes into liquidation, and there's a looking back aspect. The other thing that's important and affects directors are property and non-cash transactions between a director and a company. So where a director sells or buys property or non-cash asset to or from a company which is over €5,000, specific rules apply. So if the property or non-cash asset exceeds €65,000 or 10% of the company's relevant assets, then a shareholder's resolution of the company is required before the transaction takes place. There is a process for the shareholders to ratify or approve the transaction after it has occurred, but that should be avoided. Lastly, I want to mention the importance of the company indemnifying its directors, providing insurance for its directors. Section 235 of the Companies Act permits a company to take out directors and officers insurance. And this insurance will cover the directors and will cover the company secretary. It goes without saying that directors' responsibilities and liabilities are becoming increasingly onerous. And I would suggest that all companies should have a directors and officers insurance policy. These D&O liability insurance policies can vary considerably, and it's important to ascertain what is covered and what is not covered. It usually will extend to damages, defense costs, and investigation costs. It usually will not cover dishonest, fraudulent, criminal, or malicious acts, personal profit, or fines and penalties. It's also important that the insurance policy is reviewed from time to time. Should you have any queries, you're welcome to contact me. My email address is richard@leansherlock.ie. Thank you.